Okay. So when we first thought about this panel and we thought we'll do something on the US and the state of the market, I kind of envisaged it as just a gentle stroll through the post-election landscape. It turns out things have got a bit more lively over there since we envisaged this. So I thought it was worth getting Bob here to almost act as our translator and talk to us a bit about what's going on over in the States and sort of translate it for a more European audience, if you like. So Bob, why don't you kick off and then we'll get into the chat.
Well, I'm going to need James's cooperation, and let me explain. I'm sitting on the far right of this panel. But with James's cooperation, James, could you change places with me, please? Yeah.
There's no way.
Well, then I'm going over here because
you're in Europe now.
Yeah. Well, now this is actually a little bit delusional because I'm not on the far left. But I'm happy to translate for you all. Where do I start?
Well,
let me start with this. What does Germany charge in tariffs on a Ford or Chevrolet? Does anybody know? Does anybody in this room know what Germany charges in tariffs to bring in a Ford or Chevrolet? 10%. 10. What does the United States charge in tariffs to bring in a BMW? 2.5. Okay? So, Trump's an extremist. He wants to equalize tariffs. So that's just where we start, okay? I'll turn it over to James. Keep his microphone off, though, and that'll work.
Guys, is that better? Just in case you're wondering, Bob voted Democrat at the last election. I think that's pretty clear for us all to hear. Should we kick on with the second part of that? There's no way I was giving up my seat for you, Bob.
All right.
Maybe in Palm Beach, but not him.
We've tried to be friendly with each other, but ends up we turn out to be in litigation half the time.
So Bob, talk to us about, you were saying to me earlier about how us in Europe look through a different prism.
Well, it turns out that according to most of you, most Americans are far right. Most Americans voted for Donald Trump. Do you really think that most Americans are fascists? Do you really think that? That's what the press wants you to believe. When you come to the United States, do you encounter fascists everywhere? The fact that we fly our flag and sing the national anthem at baseball games, does that make us fascist?
It does seem very strange to me, and I'm learning. So I'm a guy that now spends once a month in the US, got an office in Fort Lauderdale, buying a home, becoming Americanized. To be more like you, Bob. But I tell you, I was at a hockey game last month, and the whole standing for the anthem thing, this isn't about America, by the way. This isn't, we should change the dynamic here. But yeah, I think partly is, culturally, Europeans are very different to Americans. And I think there's a bucking of the trend happening. So I think historically, the US leads the charge on economics and therefore boat buying. I think, just to get into the yacht side of it slightly, I think there's been a shift. So I think historically, we follow America. I think actually, at the moment, America is about to follow us in the boat buying trend. So we in Europe have been fairly soft in the 30 to 40 meter market for the last year. And to put it, so for us in Europe, we have about 25 people in our law firm. We take care of around $3 billion euro of assets a year. And we have a fairly good throughput of deal flow. The top of the market, 50, 60, 70 meters and above, has been strong for some time. And arguably stronger than I remember it being for a long while. Whether that's because it's not being diluted by the 30 and 40 meter market so much and taking up so much of our time, I'm not sure. But it's been softer in Europe at that lower end of the superyacht market for the last year or two, in our experience. America has been pumping. I mean, domestic purchases over there, you can't buy a 30, 40 meter boat quick enough. I promised when I got on stage this year, I wouldn't say anything controversial or directly opposite to what anybody else said, because I get in trouble every time I come up here. But in direct contravention to what they said in the last panel, I think the US is now slowing down, and this is where we hand it to Jeremy and Bob, but I think people are sitting on their hands more and waiting to see. And there's no doubt that Trump economics has been helpful for the superyacht world. But actually in the last month or so, since the stock market started falling a little, everything Trump says and does, whether you like it or you don't like it, if the stock market's high, people feel wealthier, they buy yachts. I think there's a shift occurring right now, because as the stock market falls and the economics change within the US, everything will change. And the reason I think it's the opposite to how it was, and they're following us now. I think in Europe, we're at the bottom of our curve, and we've had a soft couple of years. And I think the US is about to follow that as we pick up in our trajectory. And just in the last month, 6 weeks, there's been a noticeable cooling off in that 30, 40, 50 meter range with US buyers. I can't look at Bob now, because he's just going to shout at me and tell me.
Well, let's let Jeremy have a word here. So from a yacht sales perspective, Jeremy, what are you seeing? What are you hearing from your Denison guys?
So I would echo a lot of what James said, in so much that I think that for most people last year, 2024 was not the best year that most people had. There'll be a few exceptions who had dynamite years, stellar years and stuff like that, but I think across the board there are lots of numbers. I missed Richard Lambert's numbers yesterday, but I should imagine these reflected the fact that last year was a pretty slow year for most in the industry over a whole. That said, since the election happened just during the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show, we had, very, very positive sentiment come in, which I think everyone was expecting. And starting at the beginning of this year, ending at the end of last year, and our January of this year, I can tell you, was the best results we'd had in a January since 2022, when we were in the boom of the COVID boom. However, we have seen, as James is saying, a little bit of a dip and, a little bit of a slowdown in activity and inquiries in the last month, since some of this other political activity has been going on. But however, these things are subject to change quite a lot. And I remember at this conference here last year saying that we were likely to see bigger highs and bigger lows if a certain person came in. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing, basically, because James and I and Bob were at the Palm Beach Boat Show that was on last week. And I actually spoke to a bunch of the brokers because I knew I was coming here, and sort of we write deals at the show. And this year, we did 50% more deals than we did at the show last year.
That was last week.
That was last week, exactly. So I know that leading up to the show, a few people were saying, look, it's gone a little bit soft. That said, we were at the show last week, and we did 50% more deals than we did the year before.
Was that in a certain size range?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, we did 13. We signed 13 contracts. No. And we signed 4 deals just above 80 feet, and they were between 80 and I think the biggest one's about 105. Yeah, and the one thing I would disagree with what you said is that you can't sell. Well, maybe it's just us, but to say that we can't sell a 30 to 40 meter quick enough, I would say that's probably a little bit outdated, that view, to be quite honest with you. We had 28 boats in the show. That show in Palm Beach is becoming the #1 show in the US. It's overtaking Fort Lauderdale. Everyone you talk to is saying that they're starting to spend more money there than they are elsewhere. And this year, I looked at it, and in terms of the amount of product on sale, there was a huge amount of product on sale. So much so that we actually looked at some of the numbers, and we looked at the number of boats available for sale above 40 meters. And I was slightly surprised to see that there were 50 boats above 40 meters for sale. So we thought, well, that'd be interesting to see how that compares to Monaco show last year. Who thinks there were more in Monaco or in Palm Beach?
Boats above 40 meters?
Above 40 meters.
I think there were more in Palm Beach.
You'd be right. So there were just over 51 boats in Palm Beach, and there were 38 in Monaco. There's lots of product out there for sale. And so what's happening now, so it's not a question of being able to sell them faster and faster, and I don't necessarily agree with that. People are back to a sort of a normal regime where people are looking for the right deal. And probably Bob can echo that.
Well, can I hop in and get away from yachts for a second? Who cares about yachts? So what I'm trying to do is translate Trump, because there's a lot of thought that all this staccato executive orders that he's issuing are, disrupting the world, and the threats of these retaliatory tariffs are disrupting the world. In a way they are, but temporarily. I think what James is talking about is, if it happens, it's temporary. In 2016, 4 European nations contributed more than 2% of their GDP to NATO defense. 4. In 2024, 23 contributed more than 2% of their GDP. And of course, what Trump is saying, to the consternation of everybody who's freaking out, is Europe, we're not going to war with Russia. Get your act together. That's what he's saying. And it freaks everybody out. Germany is way down on that list even today. So I'm translating Trump. He's strengthening Europe. That's what he's doing. And he's saying that the post-war effort of the United States to rebuild Western Europe and Japan, which was manifest in many ways in the Marshall Plan and in these tariffs, that time is over. It continued into the Cold War. That time is over. And the idea of sending American young men to die in Ukraine, which was what Zelensky wanted Trump to say he would do, that's not happening. What is happening is, because of this, nutcase, everybody says he's a nutcase, he's strengthening Europe. That's what's going to happen. And when you talk about, let me finish. When people talk about what a nutcase he is, he had an $800 million fine by a corrupt New York judge who said that he was lying about the value of Mar-a-Lago because he claimed it was worth more than $1 billion, when a house next door, 1/20th the size, is worth $100 million. So they tried to bankrupt his company. They invented the whole Russian bullshit. They tried to put his kid in jail. I cut him a little slack.
But I think on that as well, whether we disagree or agree on that, and I don't disagree or agree for that, what I do think is, when you spend more time in America, as I've started doing over the last year or so, you start to understand culturally they're different to Europe. And things make sense there when you're there more than they do when you're not there. But one of the things that makes sense is he's strengthening America for Americans. And it's becoming increasingly insular and
not exactly.
Inwardly.
I apologize. I have to interrupt you.
Hang on, because
there
I
are
listened to you.
4,000 fentanyl distributors in Canada. 4,000. So he told the dancing queen, put the troops on the border because no more fentanyl is coming in. And there were caravans that were not stopped from Mexico. I'm sorry, I'm going to finish this. Caravans that were not stopped through Guatemala and through Mexico, and he told the Mexicans, put 10,000 troops on the border. And if you don't, we're going to give you retaliatory tariffs. And you know what happened? There are 10,000 troops on the border, and there are no higher tariffs. There are 10,000 troops coming into Canada to the border, and there will be no retaliatory tariffs. All you have to do is read The Art of the Deal.
Just start talking.
Did anyone come to this conference last year? Okay. I was here last year. I talked on stage. I said something about 7 or 8 times, which a couple of people have come up to me and laughed about. I don't know anything about politics. Don't know anything about politics at all. I know a little bit about yachts. And so I was invited on this panel to talk a little bit about yachts. I don't know about trade, tariffs,
talk about
nonsense. What I would say about Mr. Trump is that even a broken clock is right twice a day. So I don't call him an idiot or a lunatic. And there are a couple of things that I might say that he does well, and you've come up maybe with one example or so. But I came here to talk about yachts, so can we focus on yachts, please?
Let's do that. James, you were
I was
making
halfway
a point.
through.
Yeah, go.
The point was, America, I think, is increasingly inwards looking. But I think that's strengthening the European market and the rest of world market. And I think there's two elements to the market at the moment. The wealth has very clearly divided and gone east and west. You've got the American market looking at American money, taking care of American interests, and buying domestically, and still in Europe and taking them back to the US, fine. But you've really got Americans thinking about Americans. You've then got Dubai looking at the rest of the world. Sorry, the UAE, shouldn't say Dubai. The UAE and the Middle East looking at the rest of the world. And we've seen this gravitational pull of wealth, east and west. And it's left a very, empty is not the right word, but an empty middle ground geographically in Europe. And even if the non-US buyers are living in Italy, UK, wherever, a lot more of the wealth is being channeled through the UAE. So in terms of the profile of the buyer, I'm going to disagree with people on both sides of me now. I'm sorry. I still think that we're seeing more big boats, and I think the 50, 60, 70-meter market is really strong. And for us, the sub 50-meter market has been much softer, but there's that, and there's the fact that they've gone east and west. And I'd be keen to know from Jeremy and Bob whether...
James, I think that's entirely correct. I mean, you can just see some of the numbers in terms of the big boat sales that happened, and those are dominated by the American market. So what's been replaced by some of the traditional big boat owners from Eastern Europe that are no longer eligible for buying yachts. Some of the new constructions that have been, have been taken over by Americans, some very high-profile ones as well. So I wouldn't dispute anything you're saying there. I would just say that, that you were saying that they were flying off the shelf in that 30 to 40. That hasn't happened since 2023. They were flying off the shelf in 22 and 23, no doubt about it. What I would, just on a separate side, and coming back to the American and yachts element, Bob, is what I find interesting, and for us, Denison Yachting is an American company founded in the States in Fort Lauderdale. And we opened an office in Monaco 3 years ago on the basis that, well, a couple of things, is that we had clients that loved coming over to Europe, and that was one of the fundamentals, and so we wanted to support them in Europe. But also because there's no doubt about it that the Americans are by far the biggest buyers of yachts. But where do they buy boats from? Because there's no manufacturers. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. Bob's probably been doing it for a couple of years more. He remembers it when there were dozens of manufacturers in the States, and where Americans used to buy American because they could. Now they can't. There's 2 manufacturers in the States building boats that we're talking about in this size range, and one of them, both of them, but one of them is so brutally expensive that even Americans that say, I want to buy American, are thinking twice on it. And so where do they come? They come to Europe. All of these guys are coming to Europe to buy boats because the best builders are here.
I was on a Westport 117. May have made that up. I should watch my words more. I mentioned it. 112 with a long-standing American client last week in Palm Beach. $28 million buying European. And even he who like, I'm just agreeing with you. Buying American is hard to justify, particularly with the strength of the dollar against the euro when you come over to Europe, which leads on to a question I wanted to ask Bob and Jeremy. How are American buyers still buying in Europe, or are they looking more domestically?
Well, I can tell you at the Palm Beach show, in the production builders and semi-custom builders, they're all there. They're all there. Nobody's buying domestically. There really isn't any product. We've got a couple of makers, but there was a reason Giovanna Vitelli was there. There was a reason Alberto Galassi was there. There was a reason that Massimo Perotti was there. America is where the buyers are, and we might have had a hiccup in the market. What I'm trying to say is that it'll go away. It's just Trump's negotiating style, and the tariffs. I don't think they're going to come into play because it's a poker game. It's a poker game, is what it is.
Should we explain what tariffs are?
And right now, proof of the pudding is that Jaffa and Associates is has an American presence. Didn't used to. America is where the buyers are and will be, and it'll take the Russians a while to recover after we get over this mess. And the Middle Eastern folks are where they have been.
Just to be clear on James's point earlier, when you talked about it softening and coming down, are we saying that there are US buyers who are now holding back because of what's going on?
I would say that I think he's right. I think they're holding back just a little bit, right? But this will settle out. It just has to, unless the world goes to hell. And when they settle out, I mean, we had the busiest Palm Beach show we've ever had as well.
Yep.
And so,
Agreed.
to the extent that they're slowing down, I mean, it's not really manifest. And of course, he's talking a little bit about the really big boat market. But, you know, most of the activity is in the super yacht size, what I would say boats up to about 50 or 60 meters. And that just is solid. It's just solid. It was to the point where I couldn't even answer phone calls on time.
I think it's so far to fall. The US market is so strong and the number of yacht owners there is so high that even if there's a slowdown, there's such a long way to fall. And I was at no point suggesting the US market is in turmoil. I have just seen a softening, but it's softening from a very, very strong position. And Americans like to spend money and always will. More than and looking at Bob, more than I think Europeans and other nations possibly. Like, you earn it, you spend it, you enjoy it. It's slightly different culturally. Question.
Is that fair,
You
Bob?
know, I would tend to agree with that, James. Oh, sorry, Bob,
The truth is, Americans spend money. There's one law firm at the top of that list, and it's an American. So we do spend a little bit of money.
That was
And,
really slick.
we spend money to make money. I mean, that's what we do.
If I may, I would just, because I think it was one of the questions that was raised, sort of the difference between European and US buyers was that I would say, talking to my colleagues and seeing, and my experience of going back and forth over the last 20 years to the States is, and particularly in the brokerages, that they're just a little bit more impulsive with buying. And that doesn't mean stupid or whatever, just they go out, they've had a good year or they've had a good time, they know what their financial situation is, and they'll make a decision a little bit quicker, I find, than a European guy who pontificates.
You know what there is? There's a lot
time.
more newer money. 70% of American billionaires are self-made. And the speed at which some of these fortunes develop is outrageous. I had a first-time boat owner buy a Fed ship. I mean, what's that? They moved to Miami and they had a house on the water and everybody else had a boat, so they needed a Fed ship. It's just the amount of wealth is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I would obviously agree with that as well. And I've seen it. I worked at a shipyard beforehand as well, and we were selling boats from 40 to, 40 meters and above. And the number of people that came and contacted you that were looking for a 50-meter boat as an entry level, they wanted to see whether they liked yachting and they were coming to buy a 50-meter. Thinking, that's great. I want to see if I like it, and then I'll get a big boat.
James, you've mentioned to me before about the difference between Americans and Europeans in terms of doing deals. What do you see?
They tell it how it is more, and they move quicker. And I like it because you know where you stand. It's just, that's how it is.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. My father was a diplomat, but I'm definitely not, right?
I think, just to digress slightly, and it's not a discussion point, but just one of the things that blew my mind last week at the Palm Beach Boat Show was one guy who owns a 45, 50-meter yacht with us. I was hanging out with him for a while, and he was saying that to dock his boat at the end of his garden saves him $400,000 a year in berthing fees, which maybe that's normal, but I don't remember. Is it really $400,000 a year to dock a 45-meter boat?
No, I mean that's in the States. Prices are very high. That's the only thing, Bob. They really are
run
high,
out of
aren't they?
space.
So it is in Miami.
Essentially run out of space.
Okay, so that was an interesting thing I learned last week.
I do find that the States has got very expensive over the last few years, Bob, to be honest with you. I really do. And across the board, so James is talking about dock space. Dock space is eye-watering in the States.
Oh, we had two things happen, right? We had, during COVID, New York and the Northeast moved to Florida, so it drove up all the real estate prices. And like I say, people needed to have a boat, so it just drove that stuff its way through the roof. Living expenses, other than housing and yachting, are normal. But, you need a house.
Yeah. Bob, are American buyers buying brokerage boats in Europe still and shipping them back, or cruising
Yes,
back.
they have to.
Yeah.
They really have to. I mean, that's where the boats are. So when I say that's where the boats are, they're in the Med, right? The bigger boats they're buying. Now, other boats are, up to about 120, 130 feet, they're staying over there. And there's plenty over there, but you have to buy new boats, and they buy them from Italy primarily and from England.
I was going to ask that. I mean, in terms of the bigger North European yards, how confident are American buyers going beyond those yards?
They're fully confident. But it's the bigger boat in general is going to be bought from Northern Europe. Now, some Italians are big, but they don't make, I guess Benetti's might be an exception, but they're fine with it. Yesterday, I got a call literally from a guy who wants a 50-meter Benetti. And he loves the look. He wants a Benetti. So a 50 meter is a decent-sized boat. We're not talking about what I would call a mega yacht, but they're definitely comfortable. Now, the question is Turkey, right? They're a little bit less sophisticated with respect to Turkey, but generally speaking, there's no lack of comfort whatsoever with European manufacturers.
And actually, just on the Turkey front, I've got a bit of a soft spot for Turkey, but also we represent a Turkish brand, actually, from the States. And during the really boom years, we managed to sell, I think, 13 of their yachts in 2 years. So I think that some of that perception with Turkey has disappeared or changed or evolved or something like that, because, I remember those boats 20 years ago, and some of them were not fantastic. But there are a handful of brands, maybe a dozen brands in Turkey that really build a pretty good boat these days, to be quite honest with you. And I think that part of Turkey's problem is a little bit perception. I think it's convenient for people to sort of push them down. But I also, that they sort of suffer from the fact that there are 10 or 12, good guys that are building a good boat, but there are probably 50 guys that are building a boat in what we used to call a shipyard owned by a guy with a briefcase, because he didn't own anything. He just rented the place and he had a briefcase. And if it went to shit, he legged it with his briefcase. And so unfortunately that perception, I think, persists, and I think it's convenient for some of the Italian shipyards and maybe some of the other guys maybe to sort of beat them down with that sort of stick. But certainly our experience of it is that American buyers are fascinating, because over at the Palm Beach show just now, there are a couple of brands over there that don't really exist over here. I think of Ocean Alexander, I think of Horizon. These are boats that are built in Taiwan. Americans love them. They build a fantastic, they build a good product.
Yeah,
so some of these things they just need to overcome.
And there's no question about it. They're increasingly, and it's like when you want to enter any market, whatever product you are, if there's established players, you just have to be patient and not quit and keep trying to do things better than anybody else.
And make sure you have a good broker.
To leave us some time for questions, I can imagine there might be one or two. So we just get a quick thought on your kind of prediction for the next 12 to 24 months, Jeremy.
Okay, we started the year extremely positively, both in the US and in Europe. So although there was this slight slowdown just before the Palm Beach Boat Show, we had a very positive show. We had a very positive beginning of the year. I think that the overall feeling is deals are harder to do. People want a little bit more of a deal, but these Americans, they got more money than you can shake a stick at, and they will be buying boats because they love them. Love them. In Europe, we've been doing well since the beginning of the year. Activity way up, inquiries way up. We sold a 41-meter a couple of weeks ago using crypto. It was the first crypto deal we'd done for a new construction. And we've got currently 5 or 6 boats that are about to go under contract. So for us, it's looking very bright. Charter fleet is above where it was last year. Charter inquiries above. So it's harder work, and you have to work harder for it. But it's, I think if you do the job well and you put in the hours, I'm very positive. But we're always positive. Do you know what I mean? But I am very positive. This year is definitely going to be better than last. Last year was poor. Whatever anyone may say, last year was poor.
So what's going on over there now is just noise in the background.
I think that, listen, it's the extreme, like I said, you see the extremes up and down. I think things will settle down. The exchange rate, unfortunately, whereas in November it went up massively and you nearly had parity to the euro, which was a great thing. That unfortunately has dipped and we're down about 8% on where we were. That doesn't help, but I suspect some of this stuff will all calm down. I don't know how long it's going to take. This is definitely a negotiation from Trump. He knows what he's doing. And when that stuff sort of calms down and people understand what's going on, I think that the exchange rate will go back up and the Americans will come back anyway. So maybe they're sitting on their hands for a little while. It'll come back. I'm very positive that this is going to be a good year.
James?
I know it's not something we were going to talk about, and I kind of don't want to, but tariffs, I think, can be answered very simply because it touches on what you just said about Trump policies and noise making and not going to harm the industry. And I agree, because we're involved quite heavily with tariffs at the moment because half of our business is private jets. So we do yachts and we do jets. Jets go back to mainland US from Europe a lot, and they get imported, and it's a big part of our business. And the tariffs apply to jets much more than yachts at the moment because a lot of the jets have Canadian engines bolted to them. So we're seeing that. And in preparation for this, in case we got asked difficult questions, which I'm glad we haven't, but I did the homework, so I'm going to say it. Unless you take the asset back to the US and import it, the tariffs won't apply, almost certainly won't apply anyway. And that's what we're finding with the jets. And if tariffs are on the 2nd of April, if they come in to force against Europe, I don't think it will really affect the yachting industry that much anyway, because yes, you've got US clients buying European boats to take back to South Florida, East Coast. But I think most of the time they stay in the Caribbean and go between the Caribbean and the Mediterranean anyway. So they don't touch mainland US or the US. So I don't think tariffs will actually be much of a problem for us as much as some other things we've seen over the last couple of years. Thank you for letting me do my homework and get it out to you.
You did mention tariffs earlier. You asked Bob, and I was going to come back to you for that. But so your prediction for the next kind of 12 to 24 months?
I seem to be swimming against the tide slightly. I think Europe and rest of world is uniting, and we've had a difficult time economically. If you look at the big European players, Germany, France, UK, all had a difficult couple of years, and I think yacht consumers get fed up with waiting. So I think there'll be an uptick in Europe across the board. And I still think there'll be a downtick in the US at the 30 to 40 meter mark. Not necessarily in a problematic sense, but I think it will soften. And I think everything above 50, 60 meters will carry on getting stronger and stronger. Because if you're at 60 meter money, you're almost always going to have 60 meter money, and you're able to spend it.
Well,
Bob, quick thought on tariffs, and then
I'm super optimistic because I don't think that tariffs will really come into effect, because it's in the interest. Like, if you're an Italian yacht manufacturer, you're going to be talking to your government about taking certain steps so that your industry isn't destroyed, right? And I think that's going to happen across the board. I think there was a president of the United States who said, "Speak softly but carry a big stick." Now, Trump has a different approach, right? He speaks loudly, but he also has a big stick, right? I think things will work out, and I'm incredibly optimistic because I think for the first time since this war in Ukraine started, we have a real possibility of ending it. Now, it's not going to be perfectly just for anybody, and particularly from the perception of the Ukrainian government, maybe from the perception of the people who live in eastern Ukraine, they'll be okay with it. Whatever it is, hundreds of thousands of young men will not be dying, and it will be the end of the war. And whatever your perspective on what's happened with in the Palestinian-Israel situation, we're going to see an end to that as well. So it may take 12 months, but I believe we're at the beginning of a new era, unless mainland China decides to go into Taiwan. But other than that, I think what James is saying about Europe having spring back is good. I think he's wrong about us being more insular. I just am tremendously optimistic. And sometimes before good things happen, you have to shake things up a bit. And so they settle out in a different way. But that's where I think we are. So I think we're in good shape in the yachting industry, and we're going to be better.
Sorry, just to interject one last thing.
Oh.
I think people, these tariffs, I said earlier that there are no US manufacturers. There aren't any in a certain site. There are two, and they're not selling anything. And so, whereas if you've got a private jet, there are 6 manufacturers, and they have to buy a certain, from Europe, and they've got engines from Canada. And if you've got cars, and everyone wants to drive a Mercedes or a BMW, okay, there's a manufacturer there. The reality is, if the Americans want to buy yachts, they got to buy European. They don't have any choice.
Well, we do have the one major sport fish manufacturer, Viking, right?
Sorry, Viking.
But they only go up to 80 feet right now, or 82 feet. But they sell like hotcakes. And they sell for $10 million for the big ones.
Okay, Viking.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Anyone want to sort of ask a... No, that will be. No questions from the audience.
I think they're a little afraid of me.
Does anybody want to see me and Bob have a punch-up?
We've got a couple of questions on Slido. Does anyone else want to stick some Slido questions down? Well, we might as well take them. Given the rapidly escalating costs for all involved at Monaco Yacht Show, could Palm Beach become the industry's calendar event at some point in the future? Jeremy?
I mean, there's always going to be a huge event in Europe as well. I mean, you need one in Europe as well. But I think in the States, and I think that Farouk is talking from Fedship is talking later, and I'm sure he'll be able to tell you more about how much there he is. He'll be able to tell you how much they're spending in Palm Beach compared to what they're spending in Fort Lauderdale. But I think that that's the way. Certainly, coming back from this show here, it feels that way. It feels that way. So yes, to answer your question.
Should we not ask
Whoever was clearing the questions that I was asking and would not let that one through.
I think I might know.
I think there's a little bit of bias out there somewhere. Might be mine.
Do we? I think I know who that was. There's one more here. It's now a good time to look to develop an export business selling high-end semi-production yachts to America. Bob?
It's always a good time. You have the established players, but if you make a really good boat, you're going to sell it. Someone's always falling in love with a different design. I mean, sometimes I just don't even understand it, right? How do you like these boats? But people think that this boat is better than that boat, is better than that, or they like this designer better than that designer. It's always a good time. You just have to have staying power. Right? We were contacted once by a rum maker, the second biggest rum manufacturer in the world. This was 30 years ago. And they wanted to compete against Bacardi. And so I found a consultant, and they said, you could do it. It's going to take you 10 years and $10 million. That was, 30 years ago. And they spent 10 years and $10 million, and they got in. But they had to sustain losses for a while. So it's always a good time to get into a market if you make a really good product.
Do you need, serious question, do you need an American accent or someone in your team around the table with you with an American accent to succeed in America?
I don't know. I think you have an advantage. Like when you call my office after hours, you get a message from a woman with a British accent because, we think it makes us a little classier.
It does, Bob.
You were asking for yourself there, James.
I think you need people that speak American, right? And there's a few Italians here, right? Somewhere there's an Italian. So I have a lot of Italian clients. And it's not unusual. I think this conference is evidence of that Europeans come to America and they think we're all, crazy like Bob Allen, and we're quite unsophisticated. But if you learn American, which James is trying to do, and I commend him for it, you realize it's a different perspective. It's really more down to earth. And it's more straightforward, like you said. And I think it helps you if you have someone at the table who understands to translate, right? To translate. So, but yes, there's sophistication that sells, and we think, you know, we can't distinguish between a Kiwi accent and a British accent, but to us it all sounds sophisticated. But at the end of the day, they're bread and butter people.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they want to do a deal, basically. So I used to go over sometimes with some colleagues that I don't work with anymore, that I could see the Americans visually, you know, sort of puckering up when they heard some of these guys speak with an English accent. So I've seen the good and the bad. So I think it's more a mentality than an accent. And so if you understand the mentality of Americans and are prepared to accept and embrace and work that sort of way, which, to be quite honest with you, is massively refreshing. We've said more impulsive, easy to work with, more communicative, and, you know, there's less hidden messages, I would say. And that's not, you know, that's just because they're a little bit more direct. I think if you embrace that, it doesn't matter what accent you've got. You just got to have the right sort of mindset to go over there and adopt that American mindset. Get a deal.
Any final thoughts on yachting in the US? James, any final words from you? Are you done?
I think I'm done.
Bob, are you done?
You know,
No.
there was a song by a British band, Eric Burdon and the Animals. Everybody knows this song. I'm just a soul whose intentions are good. Oh Lord, don't let me be misunderstood. And I think this is real. There was a moment when Trump was elected the first time, when he was made the nominee of the Republican Party. And I don't know, how many of you know who Ted Cruz is? Do you know who Ted Cruz is? If you're not American, he was a candidate for President of the United States against Donald Trump. And I wrote a speech for him, which he did not give. He came out when Donald Trump was nominated, and he's supposed to, as the person who lost, say, you know, I support our party's nominee. But he didn't. He made a long speech and he said, vote your conscience. So he kind of ruined himself with Trump for about a week until he realized he made a mistake, kind of like Zelensky did. But the speech that I wrote said, I really objected to the way you treated me during the campaign, and it hurt me. And I don't like it, but politics is a rough business. But I encourage America to vote for Mr. Trump because I've looked at his wife, I've looked at his family, I've looked at how they love him and how he loves them, no matter what other people say. And the best judgment about a person's character is how they relate to their own family. And for that reason, I ask you to support him. And what I'm saying is that in Europe, you see a filter, you look through a filter of your own press, which is the printed press and the television press. But it is a filter. It's a constant filter. And I believe that he is tremendously misunderstood, not to say that his personality is exactly what everybody would hope for, but his intentions are good. And that's my concluding thought.
Tremendous. Put your microphone down.
You're done.
I don't know anything about
James,
politics.
you're done.
That was great. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time.